Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Red Hour, a show I do twice a week where I throw a little bit of chaos into Star Trek by reviewing a random episode. And today's episode is the Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 1, Episode 6, Where No One Has Gone Before. And the teaser starts off with um, the USS Fearless is meeting up with the Enterprise, and they are going to do engine experiments. Well, it starts off with a captain log, but they're going to do engine experiments to try to increase propulsion and do a test. And Riker is skeptical of these tests because they he's he thinks that it's just a bunch of crap, a bunch of bull crap, and they Picard says that they had run these tests on other ships before, and it worked. And uh, Riker says that those ships were older ships, and this is a new ship, and with a new engine. So he doesn't believe it. So uh, the the chief uh, engineer at this point is Lieutenant Commander Argyle, and him and Riker go to the transporter room to meet up with this guy named Kaczynski, who's running the tests, and he has an assistant with him. And the assistant doesn't say his name, but anyway, they beam on board, and he meets them, and the guy is kind of arrogant, kind of an asshole, and uh, Riker asks Troy. Troy's there with them, and Riker asks Troy what he thinks, and she says that Kaczynski is arrogant and sure of himself, and that she can't get a reading on the assistant, which is odd because she can usually everyone she can feel something. With this guy, she doesn't feel anything. So that's the teaser, and then we get the credits and the theme. So back in engineering, in the engine room, Wesley is working on a. Sorry, I got something going on with my eyes. Wesley is working on a school project in engineering, and Kaczynski asks what he's doing there, and the engineer tells him what's going on. So the assistant, Kaczynski tells the assistant to input this formula so they can start the test. And there's a little bit of argument over whether he's allowed to do this because the chief engineer hasn't, gave him permission yet. So he explains what he's doing, and Riker again is there overseeing the whole operation. Kaczynski also says that he can just ask the captain, and Riker says the captain would probably say the same thing, that chief engineer has to grant permission. So he explains what he's doing and goes tells his assistant to put in this formula, and they start off at warp 1.5, and they're talking to Picard, who's on the bridge, and uh, they're kind of like coordinating with each other, like when to start, and Kaczynski and Riker tell Picard to, now's the time to engage. So then, at this point in the show, Geordi is the navigator. So Picard tells Geordi to engage at warp 1.5. So, as they're going along, something goes wrong, and they start going faster, like super fast. Past, I think at one point, Data says that they're past warp 10, and Picard asks the velocity. And asks Data what the velocity is, and Data says it's off the scale, and then he tells Data to reverse engines. And so, well, Data first says that reverse engines at this speed has never been tried. Data or Picard insists on doing it anyway, and so they reverse engines, and Picard orders an all stop, and they calculate that they are 2,700,000 light years from the Milky Way, and they had passed over. They had passed through two different galaxies. So they're in a distant two different galaxies, and then Geordi says that at this rate, it would take them 300 years to get back. So they're in a worse situation than Voyager, because Voyager only takes them like 75 years to get back. So Kaczynski enters the bridge, and he's like really arrogant. He's really proud of himself. He thinks the experiment went well, but admits that he's messed up a calculation somewhere along the line. And again, Riker thinks he's full of shit. And so then Wesley is in engineering with the assistant, and I forgot to mention that during this experiment, the assistant is like phasing in and out, so he's like disappearing and reappearing, and Wesley's the only one that notices this. And then after this experiment happens, this assistant like falls down and falls over, and he appears to be like in a weak state. So Wesley's talking to him and asking him if he needs any help with anything, to call the doctor or whatever, and he says no. And he tells him that this is, well, Wesley mentions that was it thought? He's kind of asking him questions. He's like, was it thought? Did you think this? Was it thought that caused this to happen? And the guy says that to not speak of these things because they are not prepared for it yet. So then Kaczynski takes and he tells him that Kaczynski did take a small part of it, but so Wesley asks if Kaczynski is like basically doesn't know what he's doing, and he says, I wouldn't say that. He does take a small part of it. So Picard asks Kaczynski if he can get them home, and they have a discussion over, again, Riker thinks he's full of crap. They have a discussion over, like, Data says that since we're in a place that no one has been before. Maybe we should take this time to explore. And then, uh, Picard says, spoken like a true Starfleet, like fresh out of Starfleet cadet. And Picard ultimately makes the decision to just go ahead and try to get Kaczynski to recreate this experiment so they can get back. So then Riker goes back to the engine room where Wesley tries to tell him about this assistant guy phasing in and out, and Riker just kind of ignores him. And then they sit down to try to recreate the experiment. So they go to warp 1.5 again, but it's not working. So the assistant like starts doing his thing again and starts phasing in and out again, and then they end up even in a weird, more further away. And Picard says that they're a billion light years away from the Milky Way. And outside the ship, you see like this blue cloud with like little blue balls of light that are kind of floating around. This is nothing they've ever seen before. So then on the bridge, Worf suddenly sees a Targ, which is a Klingon pet of his from when he was a child. And Yar doesn't see it, but then she sees a cat. And then people just start seeing things throughout the ship. And Picard goes onto the turbo lift, and the turbo lift stops, and when the doors open, there's like open space there, and he almost falls into like open space, but then pulls himself back in. And then as Yar is having visions of the colony that she grew up in, where there's like rape gangs chasing after her, and she has the cat with her. And then we see a crewman playing Mozart with a group of violinists. And as Picard's walking through the corridor, you see the cargo bay, and there's a woman dancing like a ballerina. And well, at first you see her like in a ballerina dress, and then as Picard walks by, he sees her just in her regular Starfleet uniform, and he asks her what she's doing, and then she looks down, and all of a sudden she's not in the ballerina dress anymore. Then we see Picard's mom in the corridor, and she's like drinking tea, and she's like old. Which I know this is a vision and stuff, but it does kind of contradict what we saw in the Picard series where she hung herself when she was young. But we can just pretend that didn't happen. We can headcanon that away. So then he's talking to her, and he's asking her if she knows where he's at, like, and how this is all working. And she says something about them thinking that it's the outer rim of the universe. And he says, yes, that's a theory that we have. And then all of a sudden Riker shows up, and he kind of interrupts the conversation, and Picard tells Riker that he needs one more minute, and he's kind of abrupt about it. He's pissed off, and then turns back around, and she's gone. So then uh, Crusher is examining the assistant guy in engineering, and Picard makes an announcement on the bridge saying that thoughts, where they're at in this part of space, thoughts create reality, and to be careful with your thoughts and what you do, and to, to try to control them. Then in sick bay, uh, Riker, the assistant guy, Picard, and Dr. Crusher are there, and Zelensky. And Picard wants to. The guy's in a coma or whatever, and Picard wants to wake him, and Dr. Crusher advises against it. And then Wesley shows up and says, "Oh, he's my friend. Be careful." And Picard yells at him and says, we know who he is, or we they don't know who he is, but they know that he's a friend." And then Riker says that Wesley seems to have some weird connection with him. So Picard orders, or tells, he doesn't make it like an order, but tells Beverly to wake this guy up so that he can explain everything. So he explains that he's a traveler, and we see this traveler again in later seasons. In that he travels around through out of curiosity, and that he has this ability to phase in and out of space, and that's what caused this thing to happen. And then Riker admits that Wesley tried to tell him about this, and he the second time he saw it. So the first time he didn't see it. Second time Riker sees it, and that Wesley had tried to tell him, but he ignored it. And then the guy also says that he made a mistake, and that's how they ended up where they're at. And then he says that thought is like the basis of all reality, and that thought somehow is able, that's how they're able to do what they do. And Picard asked him if he can bring them back, and he said he will try. And also asked him if he's from like a different time, and he says not so much, but I guess the way you see time, yes, kind of. And Riker asks him why they haven't encountered this species before, and he says, well, they've never been interested in humanity until now, up until just recently. And then they all leave to go to the engineering, and he wants a moment alone with Picard, and tells Picard that part of the reason why he travels around is there are people. He gives an example of people on his planet, like Mozart, who are like geniuses, and they seek out these geniuses, and that Wesley is one of them. But he doesn't want Picard to tell him that. He only wants him to encourage him. So, and that he can't tell the mother either. But Wesley's genius is not musical. It's more like science and using scientific instruments and stuff like that. So then the guy so then on the way to engineering, Picard sees there's a guy screaming, saying he's on fire, and Picard tells him to put it out, and he says, how? And he says, with your mind, with your thoughts. So then he puts it out, and then he kind of goes on about his way. Then Picard makes an announcement saying the crew must concentrate on getting back home and to put a lot of concentration on the traveler's well-being. And the the traveler needs Kaczynski's help, and so Kaczynski is he's happy to be helpful, and he's no longer being an asshole, and realizes that he had nothing to do with them getting there. And so they proceed again at warp 1.5, and it's not working. The traveler's really weak, and then Wesley starts to interfere and like holds his hand, and that kind of sort of gives him energy to go on, and it starts working, and they get back to their previous position, and Riker reports that the traveler has completely phased out of their space, so he's gone. He's disappeared, and then he calls Wesley, or Picard calls Wesley to the bridge, and makes him an acting ensign. So this is Picard recognizing his, or encouraging his genius. So I think there's no B plot in this episode, and for the first season, it's a good episode. I gave it a 7 out of 10 because it's a good it's a good science fiction story that's wrapped up nicely and kind of sets up a little bit for the future. And there's not a bunch of silliness going on. I mean, the thought being the basis of reality is, it almost says to me like, okay, then what created the universe? Is that a thought? Does that come from what we would call God or whatever? Is that a consciousness? Is the universe a consciousness? These are things that I know I've personally thought about, and probably that's been like, the question that mankind as a whole has struggled with over centuries, and fought wars over, and all these things like, what is God, what is the universe, what is it consisted of, and my personal beliefs is more towards a sort of consciousness, a force, if you want to call it that. And that, if thought can manifest itself into a reality, which that's another theme that's been in science fiction over and over. The force can create a child, a human being. There's a episode of Deep Space Nine, If Wishes Were Horses, where people's thoughts were manifesting things. So I guess that's kind of a recycled idea, but to me, it somebody said the other day on another channel that Voyager had more science fiction episodes than Deep Space Nine, even though a lot of people like Deep Space Nine better. And I agree with that, but these early TNG episodes were hit and miss. But this one was a hit for me in that and that's why, because of the science fiction element of it, and again, not too goofy. It almost felt like a classic TOS episode, and probably might have been a recycled script that they were going to use for Phase Two, but didn't, but then carried over to this. So that's why I like that that episode, and could say that it's excuse me, it's above average. But anyway, we have Michelle Ferry in here. It says hello and that she hopes my thumb is fine. My thumb is getting better. It's getting better all the time. I was yeah. It's the one that pushed Wesley to a genius story. Yeah. It's one of the least annoying Wesley episodes, so I'll give it credit for that. Wesley being a genius is stand in for Roddenberry, which many people have said over the years. I think even Rick Berman might have said it. Um, I don't like the whole boy genius thing or whatever, but at least they tried to do something with. He got less annoying. What like once he gets into Starfleet and you have the first duty, that was a great episode. He's not that. He's not annoying. And I'm speaking as someone who Will Wheaton is maybe 5 years older than me at best. So at the time when I was a kid watching this, I didn't like him. It's not like I'm an adult watching this, you know. So there's other, in Discovery they take this traveler thing to a whole different level where he's now part of the Gary Seven, that the whole group of people and all that stuff. But I don't want to talk too long. I want to make this a short one. I want to say happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there who's listening. Thanksgiving, Michelle Fairy Tales. Happy Thanksgiving to anyone that's lurking and anyone that sees this in the future. There was a Y-Files live chat going on earlier, which I enjoyed. Price of Reason will be doing I don't know if anyone's familiar with his channel, but let's see if I can pull it up. Yeah. And, I mean, I like promoting other people's channels. They don't ask me to do it. I just do it because I like their channels. And if I'm thinking about them, then I will promote it. I have to do it in, I gotta find my channel now, which is not that hard to find, thank God. But I just wanted to make this review kind of short, just because there's other things going on, and I don't want to hold Michelle here too long. But thank you for coming out, Michelle. There's Price of Reason. He'll be doing a live stream later on where he was talking about Quantum Leap, the Scott Bakula series, not the new one that sucked. Um, but he at 10 o'clock tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, he has his show, and then he also has a show called The Night Owl at 11:45 Eastern. So if you're bored and want to check that out, they talk about all kinds of different stuff, politics, pop culture news, different stuff like that. I don't know. But anyway, we gotta pick the. Fate has to pick the. Almost forgot. It's the most important part of the show. Alright, so we have TNG, where no man is going. So I didn't mess that up again. 2 days in a row. Randomize. Enterprise, Season 2, Episode, what does that say? 26? I can't read. The Expanse. I don't think I've done that one. So I haven't done a whole lot of Enterprise. So I'll be back on Wednesday at 8 p.m. to talk about The Expanse. And then I'll be here tomorrow night to do some Friday night jams. I don't know, not long, maybe 30 minutes. The thumb should be able to hold the guitar just fine, so it should be fine. If I break a string, I got one more guitar. I haven't had time to change the strings, so I got one more, and then I break a string on that. Well, then I'm just gonna have to stop the show and do it next week. But I'm the Dead Man. This is the Red Hour, and I want to thank again Michelle Ferry for coming out. Anyone that's lurking, and anyone that watches this in the future, and have a good night. I'll see